Vikings didn't just fight to win, they fought to destroy. The weapons they carried weren't built for mercy, they were made to end things fast, and often in the worst ways possible. Some were so brutal, they were banned for centuries. Let's start with the one that could split a man in half before he even raised his shield. The Dne Axe stretched between 4 to 6 feet in length, making it taller than most Vikings themselves. This massive two-handed weapon wasn't something you picked up casually. It demanded years of training, tremendous strength, and the kind of coordination that kept you alive when swinging around what was essentially a sharpened tree with anger management issues. Only the most elite Viking warriors, known as housecarls, earned the right to wield these monsters. These weren't weekend fighters or casual raiders. Housecarls dedicated their lives to mastering the complex footwork, timing, and muscle memory needed to swing a Dane axe without losing balance or their heads. The learning curve was steeper than a cliff face, and failure usually meant becoming someone else's victory story. The blade itself was wide, thin, and razor-sharp, designed to slice through iron helmets like soft cheese. Pattern-welded iron construction made these blades both beautiful and incredibly strong. The design focused all the weapon's weight and the wielder's strength into that cutting edge, creating devastating results when it connected with anything softer than stone. What made the Dane axe truly fearsome was its reach advantage. While enemy soldiers struggled to get close with shorter weapons, Dane axe wielders could keep them at a safe distance. This proved especially valuable against cavalry charges. Horses might be fast and intimidating, but they couldn't charge through a forest of 6-foot axes without experiencing expensive veterinary problems. In battle formations, the Dane axe earned its reputation as the ultimate formation breaker. Shield walls that had held against spears and swords would crumble under the crushing force of these massive weapons. A properly swung Dane axe didn't just hit one enemy, it introduced several enemies to the ground simultaneously. The weapon's size created both opportunities and vulnerabilities. Missing a swing left the wielder exposed for precious seconds, and those moments could be fatal. The long handle provided devastating leverage, but required both hands, meaning no shield protection. For warriors who couldn't afford such expensive weapons, there were simpler alternatives that every Viking could carry. Every Viking owned a Seyax, from mighty warriors to young children learning their first blade work. This single-edged knife measured 1 to 2 feet long, serving as tool, weapon, and symbol all wrapped into one practical package that never left their side. The Seyax handled countless daily tasks: cutting rope, preparing food, carving wood, skinning animals, and defending against sudden attacks. It was the ultimate multitasking tool of the medieval world, except instead of opening cans, it specialized in opening enemies. Viking craftsmen decorated the blades with intricate runes and patterns that told stories about their owners' achievements and beliefs. Vikings wore their Seyax horizontally along their belts for instant access with either hand. This wasn't just convenience, it was survival preparation. In close quarters combat, grabbing your backup weapon quickly could mean the difference between walking away or being carried away. The horizontal position kept the blade from getting tangled in clothing during fights. Some designs featured a broken back spine with distinctive angles that improved penetrating power through leather armor and thick clothing. This wasn't a manufacturing flaw, but intentional engineering that made the blade more effective at punching through tough materials. Women and children carried Seyax just as commonly as men, since Viking society understood that danger could strike anyone, anywhere. Simple construction made them affordable for everyone, unlike expensive swords or specialized axes. The Seyax proved that good things really did come in small, extremely sharp packages. Any competent blacksmith could forge a decent Seyax from basic materials, making effective personal protection accessible to even the poorest Viking families. The Seyax was basically the Swiss Army knife of the Viking age, except it only had one tool, and that tool was really good at stabbing. But while every Viking carried one of these reliable blades, the real backbone of their armies relied on an even simpler weapon. The spear earned its place as the most common Viking weapon through pure practicality and economic sense. While wealthy warriors showed off with fancy swords and massive axes, the humble spear was quietly winning most of the actual battles across the Viking world. Simple construction, an iron point attached to a wooden shaft, made spears incredibly cheap to produce and easy to replace. Most stretched up to 9 feet long, giving wielders enormous reach advantages over enemies with shorter weapons. Having 9 feet of reach meant you could poke serious problems before those problems got close enough to poke you back with interest. Vikings designed spears for dual purposes, throwing them at distant targets or keeping them close for thrusting attacks. This versatility made spears incredibly practical weapons that adapted instantly to changing battlefield conditions without requiring different equipment or specialized training. Some clever designs included wings, metal projections extending from the spearhead that could catch enemy weapons, break blades attempting to block or prevent overpenetration into targets. Wings effectively turned ordinary spears into flying traps that grabbed whatever they encountered and refused to let go. Shield wall formations relied almost entirely on spears to create devastatingly effective defensive lines. Multiple rows of Vikings with spears presented an impenetrable wall of sharp points extending beyond their shields, creating a moving fence of death that made frontal attacks essentially suicidal. The lightweight construction allowed warriors to carry multiple spears without being weighed down, providing backup weapons if primary spears broke or got thrown. Vikings appreciated that spears required minimal maintenance compared to complex edged weapons, just a sharp point that stayed effective with basic care. Simple weapons meant more time fighting and less time sitting around the campfire playing blacksmith. While spears dominated the battlefield through numbers and practicality, the truly wealthy warriors had access to something far more prestigious. Viking swords represented the ultimate status symbol, expensive, beautiful, and definitely not available to everyone. These double-edged masterpieces typically cost more than most Vikings earned in several years. Owning one meant serious wealth, exceptional skill, or incredibly generous relatives. Pattern welding combined different types of iron and steel to create distinctive wave-like patterns that weren't just decorative. They indicated superior quality and incredible strength. A pattern-welded blade was like owning a luxury sports car, except instead of impressing neighbors, it impressed enemies into retreating. Vikings decorated handles and guards with precious metals like silver, bronze, and gold, creating weapons that were both functional tools and portable works of art. They gave their swords personal names that reflected their unique histories and battlefield achievements. These weren't casual nicknames, but serious titles that carried real weight throughout Viking society. The balance was crucial for effective use. The pommel at the handle's end served as counterweight that made the blade feel lighter and more responsive. Proper balance meant the sword felt like a natural extension of your arm rather than a heavy stick you happened to be gripping. Vikings carried swords in leather scabbards worn at the hip or across the back. Hip carry allowed faster drawing, while back carry kept the weapon accessible during other activities. The scabbard protected the precious blade from weather and accidental damage. Sword ownership came with social responsibilities. A Viking with a sword was expected to defend those who couldn't defend themselves and demonstrate proper skill in using it effectively. Having a sword meant you couldn't just talk tough. You had to back it up with cold steel. The sword's reputation as the ultimate Viking weapon was earned through centuries of legendary battles and heroic deeds that became the foundation for epic stories. But even the finest sword needed protection from enemy blows, which is where another essential piece of equipment came into play. The Viking Shield served as both an essential defensive barrier and surprisingly effective offensive weapon, proving that the best protection could also deliver bone-crushing punches. These round discs measured 30 to 36 inches across, providing substantial coverage while remaining light enough for extended use. Viking shields showcased advanced woodworking with multiple layers of wood arranged in alternating grain directions, creating maximum strength with minimum weight. It was like making super strong plywood, except instead of building furniture, Vikings were constructing portable fortresses. The iron boss at the center protected the warrior's hand, but also functioned as a devastating weapon for delivering punches that could shatter jaws and break noses. Getting hit by a shield boss was like being punched by a really angry, really heavy doorknob. Bright colors and bold patterns helped warriors identify allies during chaotic battles where everyone looked similar in armor. These designs weren't just decorative, they were survival tools that could mean the difference between receiving help and receiving a sword to the face. Having the wrong shield pattern could mean getting helpful assistance from someone trying to kill you. Shield wall formations transformed individual shields into larger defensive systems. Warriors overlapped shields to create nearly impenetrable barriers that advanced steadily while spear points jutted between gaps. This formation could dominate entire battlefields through coordinated movement and mutual protection. Vikings used shields for bashing enemies, pushing through crowds, knocking opponents off balance, and even as improvised stretchers for wounded comrades. Some received rawhide or leather reinforcement for extra durability through multiple battles and harsh conditions. The lightweight design allowed continuous fighting without arm exhaustion, making shields practical for extended battles where endurance mattered as much as protection. However, as enemies began wearing better armor, Vikings discovered they needed weapons that could crush rather than cut. When Vikings faced enemies in sophisticated armor, they needed weapons that treated metal protection like a minor inconvenience. The mace delivered concentrated force that ignored armor thickness and focused on the breakable person inside. Maces didn't care about fancy mail or thick helmets. They were equal opportunity bone breakers. Simple construction featured a short handle with a heavy metal head covered in spikes or flanges. This design concentrated all swing force into tiny impact areas, creating devastating results even against heavily armored targets. The physics rarely showed mercy to people wearing expensive metal suits. Unlike edged weapons requiring constant maintenance, maces needed virtually no care. No blades to sharpen, no edges to polish, no dulling concerns after extended use. A mace was basically indestructible. It worked the same on day one as after 100 battles. Most maces worked single-handed, providing speed and control while allowing shield use in the other hand. The concentrated impact could dent helmets, break ribs through mail, and ruin someone's day, regardless of how much expensive protection they wore. Getting hit by a mace was like being struck by a small, angry thunderbolt specializing in orthopedic problems. Some designs included hooks for pulling mounted enemies from horses, turning cavalry advantages into sudden disadvantages. The compact size made them easier to carry and use in tight spaces compared to longer weapons like Dne Axes or spears. The reinforced construction meant mace heads could withstand repeated heavy impacts without breaking, crucial during extended battles where weapon failure meant immediate disadvantage. The durability made maces reliable tools for sustained combat operations. The mace gained popularity as opponents showed up in better armor. Its ability to cause serious damage, even with glancing blows, made it particularly effective in chaotic combat where perfect aim wasn't always possible. Yet sometimes Vikings needed to strike from a distance before the close fighting even began. Viking throwing axes gave warriors the ability to cause serious problems from considerable distances before personal introductions. These Franciscas featured distinctive curved blades that created unpredictable spinning patterns during flight, making them nearly impossible to dodge effectively. Trying to avoid a rapidly spinning Francisca was like playing dodgeball with an angry, razor-sharp frisbee that really wanted to embed itself in your chest. The curved blade designs served crucial tactical purposes beyond just appearance. When thrown properly, the curve caused each axe to tumble in chaotic patterns that confused enemy attempts to predict trajectory or block successfully. Even experienced warriors found it virtually impossible to anticipate exactly where a spinning Francisca would strike. One of the most ingenious features was their deliberately designed obsolescence upon impact. The axes were constructed to bend or break when they struck targets, which sounds like terrible engineering, but was actually brilliant strategy. It was like having weapons with built-in copyright protection that stopped working for unauthorized users. Vikings used throwing axes as devastating opening moves before charging into close combat. The strategy disrupted enemy formations by forcing opponents to duck, dodge, or deal with embedded axes. Even near misses created confusion and exploitable gaps in defensive lines that could be exploited by following attacks. Lightweight design allowed carrying multiple Franciscas without being weighed down. Some specialists carried 3 or 4, providing numerous opportunities to disrupt formations or eliminate specific targets before the main battle commenced. Having multiple throwing axes was like possessing violent magic tricks, where axes disappeared from your hands and enemies fell down. The socket attachment method kept iron blades securely connected to wooden handles throughout flight, while allowing controlled failure upon impact. This prevented enemy reuse without causing embarrassing mid-flight weapon disintegration that would reflect poorly on the thrower's equipment quality. Of course, not all Viking warfare involved loud, obvious attacks. Not every Viking weapon was designed for battlefield glory and impressive noise. Sometimes Vikings needed to eliminate problems with absolute silence, turning to the Garat, a simple chord that could end conflicts without waking neighbors. The Garat was the whisper to every other weapon's shout. Made from twisted animal sinew, rawhide, or woven fibers, Garats represented minimalist weapon design taken to its deadly extreme. These weapons were cheap to make, easy to carry, and impossible to detect until the moment they tightened around someone's neck. The simplicity was deceptive. Effective use required significant skill and precision. Vikings rarely used garrots in honorable open warfare where reputation mattered and warriors sought glory through visible deeds. Instead, these weapons appeared during bitter feuds, calculated revenge killings, and specialized stealth operations where silence trumped honor. Success required getting close enough to loop the cord around victims' necks and maintaining control. It required a very unfriendly hug that nobody wanted to receive. The technique demanded perfect timing and positioning. Users had to approach targets without detection, strike when victims were isolated, and apply steady pressure while preventing escape. One mistake could result in the victim breaking free or raising an alarm. The portable nature made garrots ideal concealed weapons for scouts and specialists who needed backup options that wouldn't be detected during inspection. They could hide as clothing accessories, waist wrapping, or equipment lashings. This stealth factor meant apparently unarmed Vikings might still carry lethal capabilities. Different materials offered various advantages. Animal sinew provided strength and stealth, being thin and hard to break. Rawhide came readily available from hunting activities. Woven fibers offered comfort during use and reduced the risk of cutting the user's hands. The garrote proved that effective weapons could be completely unassuming. Just simple rope with extremely serious intentions. Vikings specializing in quiet operations often preferred guaranteed silence over impressive appearance, making the garrote their weapon of choice for work that required absolute discretion. But as armor technology advanced, even traditional weapons needed to evolve. As enemy armor technology steadily improved, and Vikings found themselves increasingly facing opponents wearing sophisticated, well-crafted protective equipment that could deflect sword cuts and turn aside spear thrusts, they desperately needed weapons capable of punching through the finest metal protection like it was constructed from thin, brittle wood. If ordinary construction hammers were designed for building sturdy houses, Warhammer specialized exclusively in deconstructing the people who happened to be living inside expensive metal suits. The Warhammer featured carefully engineered compact design with a heavy iron or steel head that typically offered two distinctly different business ends optimized for different tactical situations. One flat, broad surface specifically designed for crushing bones and organs, and one sharply pointed spike or beak engineered for penetrating even the finest armor. The fundamental physics principles governing Warhammer impacts made them incredibly effective against sophisticated mail armor that could successfully turn aside sword cuts and deflect spear points. The concentrated force delivery system meant that even if the hammer didn't achieve complete penetration through armor plating, it still transferred more than enough kinetic energy to break multiple bones and cause severe internal damage. Getting struck by a properly wielded warhammer was remarkably similar to being hit by an extremely focused earthquake that had developed a dangerous specialization in creating serious personal injury. Warhammers gained tremendous popularity during the later Viking period as their opponents began consistently showing up wearing significantly better protective equipment that rendered traditional weapons less effective. The weapon's remarkable ability to cause serious, often fatal damage even with glancing blows made it particularly valuable in chaotic combat situations where achieving perfect aim wasn't always possible. The deliberately compact size and balanced weight distribution made warhammers much easier to carry during long marches and significantly more practical to use effectively in confined spaces compared to longer weapons like Dane axes or lengthy spears. Some particularly ingenious warhammer designs included additional specialized features like curved hooks, sharp projections, or angled catches that were specifically engineered for anti-cavalry warfare, allowing determined foot soldiers to grab mounted enemies and forcibly yank them from their expensive war horses. Mounted warriors certainly never expected to be dragged unceremoniously from their carefully trained steeds by what appeared to be nothing more than an oversized, militarized construction tool wielded by a particularly irritated pedestrian. The heavily reinforced construction of warhammer heads, typically strengthened with multiple rivets or internal reinforcement structures, meant they could withstand repeated heavy impacts against the hardest targets without breaking or becoming deformed. Yet sometimes, Vikings brought something to battle that was far more terrifying than any forged weapon. The most genuinely terrifying weapon in the entire Viking arsenal wasn't carefully forged from iron or steel by skilled craftsmen. It was constructed from flesh, bone, muscle, and absolutely uncontrolled, weaponized fury that transformed ordinary human beings into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. These extraordinary warriors didn't simply carry conventional weapons into battle alongside everyone else. They literally became the weapon that everyone else feared encountering. Berserkers deliberately entered combat wearing minimal armor or protective equipment, frequently fighting completely shirtless or dressed only in animal skins that provided essentially no protection against enemy weapons. This wasn't reckless showing off or foolish bravado designed to impress spectators. It represented carefully calculated tactical strategy that provided significant advantages in speed, mobility, and psychological impact, while their wild appearance struck absolute terror into enemy hearts. The legendary Berserker Gang, or Berserker Rage, represented a deliberately induced trance-like state that transformed ordinary warriors into something far more dangerous and supernatural. In this altered state of consciousness, Berserkers genuinely felt no physical pain from wounds, experienced no fear of death or permanent injury, and fought with strength that seemed to exceed normal human limitations by substantial margins. This absolutely unrestrained fighting style created just as much immediate danger for allied forces as it did for designated enemies, because Berserkers in full combat rage simply couldn't distinguish between friend and foe during the heat of battle. Having Berserkers fighting on your side was remarkably similar to entering battle alongside trained, weaponized bears. They were devastatingly effective against enemies, but you definitely didn't want to get close enough to pet them during active combat operations. Berserkers served specialized tactical roles as shock troops specifically designed to shatter organized enemy formations through a combination of pure psychological terror and completely unstoppable physical aggression that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or deterred through conventional means. They would charge directly into the strongest enemy defensive positions with absolute disregard for personal safety, creating chaos, confusion, and exploitable gaps. Many people throughout Viking society genuinely believed that Berserkers possessed actual supernatural protection or divine strength granted directly by the gods that made them essentially invulnerable to normal weapons and conventional military tactics. Whether this belief reflected literal truth or simply resulted from the combined effects of adrenaline, combat drugs, complete psychological commitment to violence, and religious faith, the practical battlefield effect remained exactly the same. In a complex world filled with sharp metal objects, clever tactics, sophisticated strategies, and advanced military technology, Berserkers convincingly proved that sometimes the most devastatingly effective weapon was simply the absolute refusal to stop fighting no matter what horrible things happened to you during the process. Their legendary reputation for supernatural toughness and complete unpredictability made them simultaneously feared and deeply respected throughout Viking society, establishing the Berserker as the ultimate example of successfully transforming raw human fury into decisive battlefield advantages.